Margaret stood at the church entrance in her white lace gown, her hands trembling as she watched the scene unfold before her. Her groom, David, stood frozen in his black suit, pointing at the disheveled man who had just stumbled onto the red carpet. The elderly stranger wore a dirt-stained brown jacket and torn trousers. His wild gray hair and untrimmed beard was giving him the appearance of someone who had spent years on the streets. The wedding guests gasped and whispered among themselves. Some of the men in suits moved forward as if to escort the intruder away. Margaret's mother clutched her pearl necklace, her face pale with shock. But David did something unexpected. He lowered his pointing finger and walked toward the homeless man. The crowd held its breath. Margaret's heart raced as she watched her future husband approach the stranger with careful steps. "Sir, are you all right?" David's voice was gentle, concerned. "Do you need help?" The old man looked up with watery eyes, his weathered face showing years of hardship. He clutched a half-empty water bottle and swayed slightly on his feet. David turned to the crowd. "Someone please bring water and food from the reception hall." Margaret's cousin James stepped forward. "David, this is your wedding day. We can call someone to help him." David shook his head firmly. "No, he's here now, and he needs help now." He removed his black suit jacket and draped it over the old man's shoulders. The gesture was so tender, so human, that Margaret felt tears spring to her eyes. This was the man she had chosen to marry, and in this moment, she had never been more certain of her choice. David guided the elderly man to a bench beside the church. He knelt down, not caring about his expensive trousers on the dusty ground, and spoke quietly to the stranger. Margaret couldn't hear the words, but she saw compassion in every gesture. Her father had been standing at the back of the crowd, watching silently. Now he moved forward through the gathering. Margaret noticed something odd in his expression, something that looked almost like satisfaction. "Everyone please," her father announced, raising his hand. "Give them space." Margaret watched as David helped the old man drink water, speaking to him with the same respect he would show anyone. The homeless man nodded slowly, seeming to regain some strength. Then something remarkable happened. The old man reached up and removed what appeared to be a wig of wild gray hair. He peeled away the fake beard. He stood straighter. And suddenly he wasn't a broken, homeless man at all. Margaret's breath caught in her throat. It was her father. The crowd erupted in confused murmurs. David stood up slowly, his face showing complete bewilderment. Margaret felt her legs go weak as understanding crashed over her. Her father, Robert Harrison, one of the wealthiest businessmen in the county, had disguised himself as a homeless person to test David Dad. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. Robert looked at his daughter with tears streaming down his face. Then he turned to David and extended his hand. "Forgive me, son. I had to know." David stood there, speechless, his hand automatically reaching out to shake Robert's. "You see," Robert continued, his voice thick with emotion, "I built my fortune from nothing. I started as a scrap dealer, collecting metal from junkyards and selling it to recycling plants. I know what it means to be looked down upon. To be invisible to people in fine clothes." He gestured to the crowd of well-dressed wedding guests. "I've watched many wealthy families reject good people because they didn't come from money. I've seen young men court my daughter who smiled at me in my suit, but would have stepped over me if I were dressed like this." He held up the dirty jacket. Robert placed both hands on David's shoulders. "But you, David, you saw a human being in need, and you didn't hesitate. On your own wedding day, when you could have been focused only on yourself, you stopped everything to help a stranger. That tells me everything I need to know about the man my daughter is marrying." David's eyes were glistening now. "Sir, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll take care of my daughter with that same compassionate heart," Robert replied. "Say you'll teach your children to see people, not appearances. That's all I ask." Margaret ran forward, her white dress flowing behind her, and threw her arms around both men. The three of them stood together as the wedding guests began to applaud. The sound started slowly, then grew into thunderous approval. "I'm sorry for the deception," Robert said, looking at Margaret. "But some things are too important to leave to chance." Margaret pulled back and looked at her father through her tears. You could have just asked me, Dad. I've known David's character for years. Robert smiled and wiped his daughter's cheek. A father needs to see for himself. And now I have. Now, I know that my little girl chose well. David cleared his throat. Mr. Harrison, I grew up without much money myself. My parents taught me that kindness costs nothing but means everything. I would have helped that man whether this was my wedding day or any other day. I know, son, Robert said warmly. That's exactly why you passed the test. The ceremony began 20 minutes later, after David had changed into a fresh suit and composed himself. But everything felt different now, deeper somehow. When the pastor asked if anyone objected to the union, the silence was profound and affirming. As David and Margaret exchanged their vows, Margaret caught her father's eye. He nodded at her with such pride and love that she nearly forgot her lines. At the reception, Robert stood to give his speech. He told the full story of his test, explaining his reasons to the guests. Many of the older attendees nodded in understanding. They too had lived long enough to know that true character reveals itself in how we treat those who can do nothing for us. I'm giving David and Margaret my blessing, Robert concluded, along with the deed to my first scrapyard. Not because it's valuable, though it is, but because it represents where I started. May you both remember that wealth is temporary, but character is eternal. Years later, David and Margaret would tell this story to their children. They would explain that Grandpa Robert hadn't been cruel or distrustful. He had simply been wise. He had understood something that takes most people a lifetime to learn, that who we are when no one important is watching is who we really are. And David had been exactly who he appeared to be. A good man. A kind man. The right man. If this story touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe. Leave a comment below telling us about a time when someone's true character surprised you. Your stories inspire us to keep sharing tales of kindness and humanity.